On today's show, we discuss the future of Luke Schenn with the Maple Leafs, and do we need to abolish the term the Core Four? All that more coming up on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano from TSN, along with my guy, Dave Morassutti from Sportsnet. A couple things to touch on today's show. There was a report out west about Luke Schenn and what his future might be as a free agent, so we'll touch on that. And there's this weird conversation going on about the term Core Four and how that could possibly be a problematic thing that might be causing a subconscious rift in the locker room. We'll touch on that report and get to that. And obviously, Vegas 1 game away from the Stanley Cup. Will they get it done? We will tell you our thoughts a little bit later. But let's start with the Luke Schenn stuff. And this is a report that came from Donnie and Dolly out west. Rick Dollawall talking about the future of Luke Schenn. He is a pending UFA for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I don't know about you, Dave, but I thought that Luke Schenn was way better than advertised and what I expected him to be in his second tour of duty with the Maple Leafs. For me, he's one of the top, people of interest when I'm looking at these 10 pending UFAs for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at when Luke Schenn was brought here initially, he wasn't even in the lineup, right? He had to kind of get himself into that lineup. He kind of took over Justin Hall's. Remember, that was like the first time we saw Justin Hall come out. We were like, hallelujah, praise. And ever since Luke Schenn got into the lineup, he didn't give Sheldon Keefe really a reason to take him out. I think a lot of people were surprised, more so Sheldon Keefe, to see that Luke Schenn went into was able to take a top 4 role. And especially not just a top 4 role where, he was sheltered. Like, he played tough minutes, playing with Morgan Riley, playing against top competition. You couldn't have asked any more out of Luke Schenn. I think that was probably one of, if you're looking at the trades made, his might have been one of the more impactful based on value of what the Leafs gave up and what they got back.
The most impactful, if you're asking me. I thought he was more impactful by the end of it. I mean, at certain points, you could argue Ryan O'Reilly, but by the time, the second round came, it looked like O'Reilly was dealing with an injury. Luke Schenn became the more impactful player, in my estimation, from all of the deadline additions. So I think bringing him back into the fold would be a great thing to do. I mean, if you look at what they were able to do as a pairing, him and Luke Schenn in the playoffs, they're one of the best pairings legitimately that when you look at expected goal differential, they were one of the best pairings that the Maple Leafs had. One of the best pairings in the NHL. Like, their expected goals were like under 2 per 60. And there's not a whole lot of Leafs that were able to do that. So, I think that for sure Toronto should definitely be looking to keep this guy in the fold long term. And apparently, according to Rick Dollawall, a good reporter out west who, has ties, obviously, they're more of a Vancouver-based team in their Vancouver-based show. But with Luke Schenn, the thought was maybe Vancouver wants to bring him back into the fold. Why don't we show the clip that he was saying on his show, what he's hearing on Luke Schenn, and might be a positive for Leaf fans, hoping that he comes back.
Luke Schenn.
Yeah, I just wanted to give an update on Luke Schenn. He is talking with the Maple Leafs about staying in Toronto. Schenn is obviously going to get a well-deserved bump in pay, but he's also looking for term, Donnie, no surprise there, and some trade protection as well after bouncing around so much the last few years. He's got a young family looking for a more stable situation. You can't blame him. I mean, if he gets to July 1st, there's going to be a ton of interest in Luke Schenn. I think he got that playoff feel going 2 rounds.
He got a taste of the playoffs.
He got the taste of the playoffs.
Again.
I don't see him going. That's just my gut. I don't see him saying, and everybody knows Vancouver. We don't know what's going to happen here next year, Donnie, if there's going to be playoffs or not. We have no idea.
Yeah.
I think, you fight hard to become a UFA. And when you do, you get to pick and choose. And you want to pick and choose. You want to pick a winner. I'm just, I think he liked it in Toronto.
Do you think he wants to stay there?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And
Okay.
I think they are talking. But I also think that, at his age, 33, probably wants to play on a winner now,
Yeah, and say what you want about the Leafs, but at this point, as we speak today, they have more chance of winning the Stanley Cup than the Canucks do. And I think he surprised a lot of people in Toronto who have long memories, and they remember the disappointment that Luke Schenn's career started out with.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
High first-round draft pick in Toronto.
That's it.
Off he goes to Philadelphia and Arizona and Vancouver and Tampa
all
Bay, all over the place, and he is the poster boy for perseverance and altering your game. And I think people were surprised. I think maybe even Sheldon Keefe was surprised because he gave him significant ice time in the playoffs.
Morgan Riley,
and it was I think despite what happened in against the Florida Panthers in the playoffs, real positive experience for him and the Leafs.
And who tried to get Luke Schenn at the trade deadline? Brad Treliving in Calgary. Where's Brad Treliving now?
So there you have it. So a couple of things, it sounds like he wants to stay in Toronto, and, Rick Dollawall very connected with, anything that's happening in Vancouver and the Vancouver players. And with Luke Schenn coming from there, you got to think he's got some connections with the Luke Schenn camp, if not Luke himself. So I trust his reporting that he wants to stay and that they are talking with the Toronto Maple Leafs, that he wants to play for a winner. Obviously, Toronto, whatever you want to say about the team, they're a winner. They are 100% a Stanley Cup contender as long as they have this group in place, which they currently do. And I think that's, the plan is to also contend next season, not to take a step back. So I think that there would be interest from Luke Schenn. The interesting thing there that he said, though, at the end was, there was interest from Calgary when Brad Treliving was the GM there to try and bring him in as a piece of the deadline. They didn't get it done, obviously. He ends up going to Toronto. I mean, isn't that really nice to hear? If you want Luke Schenn to come back, that, okay, Schenn enjoyed his time here, and, it sounds as though Brad Treliving had an affinity for Luke Schenn at the deadline. Things went very, very well. He brought the best out of Morgan Riley during the playoffs. Sounds like this could be a match made in heaven, that they probably will figure something out here, Dave.
I think the important thing, too, is when you hear Brad Treliving talk about what he wants to do in Toronto, and he talked a lot about the defense. And you look at the playoffs, you look at the teams that were gone far in the playoffs, Florida. I'll even put like a team like Dallas. You put Vegas. I think Vegas, obviously. Strong, physical, heavy defensemen. Like the Leafs, they made that a priority when they brought in Luke Schenn because they didn't have who else other than Luke Schenn was bringing that style to the team, right? Like Giordano did it last year. I think he lost a step for sure in the playoffs, and I think that hurt the Leafs too, that they didn't really have anyone other than Luke Schenn that was providing kind of that wearing down physical style on the back end. And you're seeing in the playoffs right now, yes, you need speed, you need skill, but you also need that physical play. You got to wear down your opponent somehow, and that's something the Leafs just could not do against Florida, and it showed.
Yeah, 6'2", 225 pounds. Luke Schenn has the size and the weight, I guess, if you want to look at it, that is considered an asset for Brad Treliving and what he likes to have on the blue line. You look at Calgary, there are a lot of big, tough, physical defensemen in Calgary. So, I definitely see a match here with Luke Schenn and the Toronto Maple Leafs. The question is, well, what does that contract look like? How much would he want to have to stick in Toronto? Is there a discount in the fold? Is it going to have to be term? Like Rick said, is there trade protection that's going to have to be involved? Are the Maple Leafs willing to go there? That's the question. And I guess my follow-up to you, Dave, is going to be what does a good contract look like for Luke Schenn that's fair for him and the Maple Leafs? Like, where are you comfortable at, term and dollar-wise?
Yeah, and you brought up the trade protection too. Like, I think in that clip when you listen to it, the big sticking point was making sure that you have some trade protection, because this is someone who has bounced around from city to city to city to city. And, you get to a certain point in your career where, yeah, he's already won a Stanley Cup. Yeah, he still wants to win, but he also doesn't. Yeah, sorry, 2 Stanley Cups. You don't want to have to continue to do the moving with it, especially he's got a young family. That's something he takes, that takes importance too.
Literally just had another baby in
February,
March,
wait, it was like when he got traded. Like when he got
whenever
traded.
that happened. So I guess last weekend of February, maybe it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he's going to want at least 2 years, and it seems like if you look at what the deals are looking like now, I'm like, you look at Gavrikov, he signed for 2 years because he knows in a few years the salary cap is going up. Now, I don't think Luke Schenn is trying to do what Gavrikov is doing, because I think they're
me either.
Yeah. But I think a 2-year deal probably is what he's looking for, at least not to have that 1 year, because he did sign 2 years in Vancouver, right? So it was 2 years, 1.7 million. So I'm thinking, are you doing 2 years in and around an AAV between 1.75 and 2.5 is kind of where I'm thinking, in that range for Luke Schenn.
AAV? You're looking at AAV at that
AAV.
price?
Yeah, AAV.
So if he says, give me 3 years, at 6.3, we'll say 6 million. We'll just make it 6 million.
Yeah,
so that's 2 million a season on a 3-year deal. You give me trade protection. Are you signing off on that deal if you're true living?
I would. I think for $2 million, like that's a guy who proved he could play top 4 minutes, likely better off in a bottom 6 role.
Well, how concerned are you, though, that at 33 years old, going to be 34 next season, how concerned are you that this was just kind of a revelation and you sign him to a $2 million deal and all of a sudden he kind of turns into a pumpkin maybe, and the legs really start to go on him, and maybe he's not as impactful, and you've got him under contract and you've got him at a pretty healthy cap hit for the next 3 seasons? Like, would that not worry you at all on that type of deal?
So what I would do in this sort of case, if he wants trade protection, you say trade protection for the first 2 years. The 3rd year of that deal, you don't get trade protection. That's how I would try to structure that. But the thing for me with Luke Schenn, he was never the fastest skater. Even when he came into the NHL, first and foremost, skating was never a strong suit for him, right? And he's actually proven these last few years that he can play a style that seems to benefit him. Like if you play him with the right partner, he can be serviceable. He can. Yeah, $2 million seems like a lot, but we also have been paying Justin Holl $2 million the last few years. Now, Justin Holl is a little bit younger than Luke Schenn. I do understand that. I don't know if he's that much off. I think they're roughly
like a 4-year difference between the two.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, $2 million seems like a stretch. If you're getting the 3 years, maybe you can get the AAV down to the point where it's not as big of a blow.
I think I'd be more comfortable. Like if you want 2 years, 2 million, like 2 years at 2 million AAV, I think I'd be willing for that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to stretch it to that 3rd year, I think I need a little bit lower on the AAV, like a 1.75 or something like that times 3. Something just a little bit less.
And that's why I suggested 2 years. 2 years is a term I'm comfortable with. They did that with Mark Giordano to get him to take a lower cap it. They gave him 2 years. So I think if you tell Luke Schenn, we're going to give you a 2-year commitment.
The thing is, if there's multiple suitors on Luke Schenn, like you might have to give up a little bit more. You know what I mean? Like if the report that Rick gave is there's multiple teams that would be interested in Luke Schenn, like I'm not sure you could say, hey, we're only going to give you 2 years because that's what we did to Gio. I mean, Gio was like, I'm going to Toronto and that's it. Like there was no competition. For Luke Schenn, there's going to be some competition there when it gets to free agency. There's going to be multiple teams that are going to be looking to get this guy paid. And if you look around, the defensive market's not really that strong. And you actually just saw a couple come off the board with Gavrikov and Damon Severson both signing extensions. Provorov was another player that maybe some teams could have used as a defensive upgrade, and he's no longer on the board with him going to Columbus. Now all of a sudden, like Luke Schenn's value maybe goes up a little bit. So that's the only thing where I'm at with Luke Schenn, where, I think to an extent you do bring him back, but there's certainly going to have to be a cap of what that is. And I would imagine that if Luke Schenn wants to come back to Toronto, there might have to be a little bit of money left on the table and a bit of a discount for, it to make sense for the Leafs, I would say. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
For sure.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about this term, the core four. There's this report from Elliot Friedman that apparently the core four term may be causing a bit of a rift in the locker room, a rift that's hindering the opportunity to make a good culture. I don't know. We'll get into it on the other side. But first, Dave, how about a word from our show sponsor?
Yes, today's show is brought to you by a product that I use literally every day, AG1 by Athletic Greens. Maybe you're like me, you want to be healthy and eat well, but it's always easier said than done. That's no longer the case with AG1, because with one delicious scoop of AG1 in a glass of water each day, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, nervous system, immune system, energy recovery, focus, and aging, all of those lovely things I just listed. It can be hard and expensive to keep track of multiple different supplements and vitamins, not to mention how hard it can be on your stomach. AG1 does cost you less than $3 a day. You're investing in your health, and it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. So right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free, I said free, 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NHL Network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NHL Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast, the Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. Just a reminder, we are continuing to put out daily Leafs content throughout the week. Every Monday to Friday, we'll have new episodes out wherever you get your podcasts, also up on YouTube. Don't forget, you should subscribe to the Locked On Leafs pod if you enjoy the conversation that you're hearing today, because there's a lot of stuff that's going to be going down between now and July 1st and even beyond. So make sure that you're subscribed to the Locked On Leafs podcast to stay up to date on what's going on in Leafland. And one of the kind of new conversations that's kind of percolating throughout Leafland of late is, the conversation about potentially abolishing the term the core four, because it's potentially been a bit of a problematic term within the Leafs locker room. And this report kind of comes from Elliot Friedman, who talked about it on the 32 Thoughts podcast. Dave, I know that you listened to it, so you want to kind of relay the message that Elliot was talking about when referring to, this report of the core four and some of the other players not appreciating that term.
Yeah, so much. I mean, we talked about it all throughout the year about this idea of the core four: Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares, the guys who pretty much combined to make a majority of the Leafs cap, pretty much attention on a daily basis. And what Friedman was kind of talking,
I would say it's like 50% of the cap, but they also have scored 51% of the goals.
Yeah. So they have definitely done their half, basically. So it kind of gives this idea that it's the Toronto Maple Leafs, but it's the Toronto Maple Leafs of the core four. Like, those are the guys that kind of get all the attention. Now, Friedman said, and I listened to this because when he was talking about all of this and how it was too much attention being shared upon them, how the identity of the team kind of revolves around them so much, it wasn't so much of a jealousy thing that players were jealous about it, but it just makes it tough to really make it feel like it's a 23-man roster when 4 guys get all the attention, and it's always like it's on them. And look, the way the Leafs play, who are usually the top 4 guys leading in ice time every night? Now, granted, they're being paid and they're good players, but Mitch Marner's playing at times 23, 24 minutes. We've seen Austin Matthews play that as well. Nylander and Tavares not as much, but they do get their fair share. And then it kind of just feels like everyone around them is like spare parts, right? They're just constructing with just these 4 guys and then trying to build around them. And that's a tough thing for a team that's, trying to compete, and they're trying to identify what they want the rest of the roster to be. So when Brad Treliving was brought in, he was asked about the core four. Like literally one of the do you feel like you're going to change the core four? And he pretty much said, I don't like that term because this is the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's about the full team in the locker room, not just 4 guys. And that's, I think, where some people that's where I started to get the idea of, okay, Treliving definitely wants to take the attention away from these 4 guys, but it's hard not to when those guys are making as much money as they do.
Making as much money as they do and producing, and the expectation on those guys more so than anybody else. Like Austin Matthews, he didn't score 50 goals this year, and it was looked upon as a down year for Austin Matthews. Could you imagine if Kerfoot potted 40? Could you imagine the celebration if Alex Kerfoot had a 40-goal season? That's what it is. It's expectation around these core 4 players and how they're higher than anybody else. For one, the what they can do just from their skill level and the productivity they can provide, but also their contracts, obviously, is another reason why they all are referred to as the core 4. When Riley signed his deal, some started to call it the Fab 5, however you want to slice it. I'll say this, though. Here's where I somewhat laugh at this conversation, because not one time has Matthews, Marner, Nylander, or Tavares ever referred to themselves as the core 4. This has always been a media-driven term. So 2 things. When the Leafs say that nothing from the media is getting into the room, that's a bold-faced lie, because clearly this is getting into the room, the term the core 4.
Yep.
And second of all, Treliving wasn't the first Leafs manager to say, I don't like the term the core 4. Kyle Dubas used to say it all the time. He's like, you guys always speak of the core 4. He said, we have a larger core group that we refer to when I refer to the core. And he always had Muzzin included in there. Hyman was included when he was, part of it. Despite those guys not wearing a letter or not being part of that core 4 term, they were always part of the core. Freddie Anderson was part of the core. Whenever big group decisions were made, all of these guys were kind of lumped into making these decisions. Did things change when some of those guys ended up leaving the locker room? Like, Muzzin and Hyman and Freddie, maybe, and did others not step up in their absence? Perhaps that could be the case, and that sometimes happens when you see mass turnover year after year. But it's not like this was, a term that the Leafs themselves or that management or that the players, boasted about or talked amongst themselves, referring to themselves as the core 4. This has always been a fan and media-driven term. This is what kind of bugs me about this report. And I mean, how are you going to stop that from happening? Are you and I all of a sudden just going to stop referring to those guys as the core 4? No, we're not. Brad Treliving might not refer to it as the core 4, but is that really going to change anything? Because they weren't referred to that internally before anyway either. It's always been an external term by the media and the fan base. And I'm not quite sure why this is now being brought up as there's a problem with this term and that it's affecting the group internally. I don't think that there could really be a way to change it unless you legitimately trade one of these players. I think that's the only way that you can really abolish the core 4 is if it's no longer a core 4 and one of them find themselves on a one-way ticket out of the city. That's honestly what I believe. It's the only way that term is going to be stricken from the record of, Leafs Nation going forward.
No, and that's why we kept talking about the need to trade, to potentially move off one of these guys, just because not just because you need to move a guy for the sake of making a move, but just because when you build your identity around 4 guys and then you have to try to figure out a way to fill a roster, it's so tough when it's so much being invested into those 4, right? And when all those 4 guys are making so much money, and it's like, well, they got their money, now we need them to produce, and the production hasn't been there, right? And then the rest of the roster kind of lacks because you're trying to nickel and dime your way to figure it out, right? To figure out how to fill out the rest of the roster.
And that's the thing too. The core 4 also puts more pressure on the players. I wonder if even I would guarantee you that Matthews and Marner and Tavares and Nylander don't like it either, because when they're losing, who do we blame?
Right.
The core four, right? Because often it's them who's not producing. It often is them, but it's not like we're saying, didn't get enough out of David Kampf, didn't get any goals from Sam Lafferty or Alex Kerfoot or, Timothy Liljegren. No, it's always the core four is the one who take the brunt of the negativity that's spewed about the Maple Leafs as well when they don't produce. And typically it's because it's those guys, because those four players that we talk about often that make up the core four term, Matthews, Marner, Tavares, and Nylander, when they're rolling, the team's on fire. The team is winning a lot of games. When they're not, the team is not winning a whole lot of games. So, internally they could hate the term and they could hate whatever they want, but ultimately the success always will fall under what those four guys are doing. Whether you want to lump them as a core four or just say, hey, some of our best players, it really doesn't matter. I don't know. I thought that it was kind of a weird report to come out and that other players internally may have an issue with it. It's not them who wants it. Ultimately, it was the media and it was the fan base that kind of came up with the term and ran with it. I'm not really sure what internally the team is supposed to do about that.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't start selling merchandise to say the core four, right? Like none of that was happening. This was obviously, I mean, we talk about it too, so we kind of throw the core four up, but we didn't.
That's what I mean. It's the media. That is us. We are lumped into it. It is partly our fault. I get that, but what are they supposed to do about it? The team.
There's not really much you can do, right? Like if you look at.
You trade one of the players so that we can't talk about the core four because there's no longer a core four. That's the only way out of it, if you ask me.
Exactly.
That's why you trade somebody. You say, why did you trade this? Why did you trade Nylander? Well, we wanted the people to stop looking at them as a core four. Like, that's not an excuse to trade somebody.
No.
I'm just saying that's the only way that I think it actually happens.
It's just your thought process. That's how we can get away from. If they really want to get away from that idea, that's the only way really to have it happen.
Yeah. Yeah, like that's the only organic way to stop using that term is for it to no longer exist, as in the core four no longer exists. Again, this is something that I guess we'll have to keep an eye on whether or not a trade does come to fruition. It doesn't sound as though they're willing to do do much there with the core four. They kind of like the players. Those core guys, I suppose we'll call them then. Like I don't really know how else to refer to them at this point now. If that's what we're trying to do is disband that term, but it should be an interesting offseason with a lot of those guys being in the rumor mill, and we'll see if something actually comes to light. All right, on the other side, Vegas. One win away from winning themselves a Stanley Cup. Why don't we touch on what we've seen so far through the Cup Final, give our thoughts on who the Conn Smythe frontrunners should be. So we'll get to that on the other side. But first, let me tell you about one of today's show sponsors. It's eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit, same with their vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit, ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. All this nonsense off-ice Leafs mumbo-jumbo that's going on, there's actually some hockey that's still being played with the Stanley Cup Final. We are through 4 games of the Cup Final. Vegas up 3-1. They got it done last night. 3-2 win, just held on in the final seconds. They were up 3-0, and then, the Florida Panthers, those pesky Panthers, coming back, the comeback cats, as they call them, almost did it again, but Aiden Hill came up big with a couple of saves in the final minute to stop the Panthers comeback and put them up 3-1. And now they head back to Vegas for Game 5. That is going to be on Tuesday. Tuesday, right? Sunday, Monday. Yes, Tuesday. You think they get it done? You think they get it done in 5 at home?
Well, they've been really good at home. I feel like for Florida to get the win at home obviously was crucial, but I just think like they barely eked out those wins at home, right? With that advantage for themselves. I just think Vegas, they're a veteran team. They know that they're just one win away. Bruce Cassidy, like what did he do after Game 3? He gave the guys a day off, like on their off day. Just don't even think about Game 3. Go and enjoy Florida for the day. And then they came back and they won Game 4, right? So I have a really good feeling about them in Game 5. I think winning it in Vegas would also be really cool to have that first Stanley Cup win to be on home ice. So I'm rooting for that storyline. I don't want I always like the team winning on home ice. Can't remember. I don't think Colorado won it on home ice last year. I think it was. Oh, I think they won it in Tampa last year. So
think so, yeah.
So it's been a little while since we've had a team actually win a Stanley Cup in their home building. So I'd like to see that happen.
Yeah, I'd like to see it happen too. I think they deserve it, man. Like that Vegas crowd is always so fired up. So to give them a Stanley Cup, I mean, they got to witness somebody win a cup in their building back when the first time they were there, Washington. Remember, they won in Vegas. But if their own home crowd could win a cup, that'd be awesome. That really, really would be awesome. And hey, you won't even have to fly out to party. You just take it right to the Strip. I mean, that'll be something for sure. But I think also you look at it like Kachuk's banged up, like the guy's playing so hurt, you could tell. So that kind of takes him out of the equation a little bit. I mean, he's still out there gutting it out there, which is, crazy to see. Bobrovsky's doing what he can do. He's still playing at a very high level, just not the otherworldly level that he was at during the Toronto and the Carolina series. But ultimately, for me, Vegas just too deep, too good, and they play the right way. And Florida is having a tough time with that because they were a team that was just really opportunistic and waited for Carolina and Toronto and Boston to make a mistake, and then they were capitalizing on that. I mean, this Vegas team just doesn't make a mistake. They don't turn the puck over, right? Yeah. And that's why they've really struggled to produce some offense here. And Vegas has found a way to put pucks past Bobrovsky. So I think that it's done 2-5. That's just my opinion. Really quickly before we jet here, who do you think is the Conn Smythe front runner right now?
Not because I put money on him, but I think Jonathan Marchessault would be my pick. Yeah. Because, and it's not just how he's played in the Cup final, but it's the whole Cup, like the whole playoffs.
13 games in the last 14, or 13 goals in the last 14 games.
Yeah.
It's insane what this guy's been able to do.
I know that Jack Eichel will get some love too because, I'm not saying because he's a name, but he's also been really good in the playoffs. And
Chandler Stevenson, I think, will get some love too. I mean,
he's an underrated pick right now. Like he was huge in game. I mean, he was the reason why they won Game 4.
Yeah, 2-goal performance.
So Chandler Stevenson, I didn't really think about him too much, but I personally think Jonathan Marchessault is the front runner. And then I think, you can make a case for like Eichel and Stevenson to be almost neck and neck for just behind him.
No Adin Hill. You're not throwing Adin Hill into that mix?
I mean, it'd be deserving too. Goalies usually get a nice little bump, but he wasn't there in round 1, and I think some people are going to hold that against him. But I mean, ever since he came in, like he's been so good. But I think Adin Hill is in my he's obviously up there too. But I just think Marchessault has been so crucial to score all the goals he's been scoring. Like he's just been so key for their offense.
Curious, if you had to pick one of the goalies though, like if you were doing a power ranking, I guess, of like the 5, or you're given a ballot where you had to do your top 5, would Bobrovsky or Adin Hill, like who would you write down first?
I still do Bobrovsky.
Yeah, even if they lose in 5 games.
Yeah, he hasn't gone much help. Like he's expected to stop 2 goals. Make sure he doesn't allow more than 2 goals every night. Like that's. I mean, he's done it for the most part, but like he's the workload he's had to carry throughout the playoffs has been ridiculous. So and he's just been so good. So I still would go with Bobrovsky atop.
Yeah, that's probably the right call, just based on those round 2 and 3 performances alone, and he's been good, just not otherworldly here in the Stanley Cup Final. It's tough to do as well when you're getting screened by your or by your defenseman a lot, and being peppered with some pretty high danger chances as well. All right, well, we'll probably tee that one up also on tomorrow's show just a little bit more, but just wanted to kind of touch on that one coming off of the weekend. We'll see where the Luke Schenn stuff goes, and also the core four thing. I honestly do not see that going anywhere unless they make a trade. That being said, on tomorrow's show, I want to get into the discussion about what some of these contracts could start to look like, though. We haven't really gone deep into what a Matthews or a Nylander extension could look like. They're eligible in just a few weeks. So I think on tomorrow's show and Wednesday, we'll start to dive into what those extensions could look like or should look like. So make sure that you're subscribed if you want to hear that conversation. That'll do it for us here today on the podcast, though. To thank you all for listening and supporting to the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcasts and platforms, also up on YouTube, and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti. Follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs on Twitter. Go ahead, smash that like button if you're watching on YouTube. Leave a comment down below your thoughts. Is the core four term going to be abolished? Or also let us know, what is the ideal contract you want Luke Schenn to sign here in Toronto? Let us know in the comment section down below. We'll be back with another episode for y'all tomorrow. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.